Flexibility, page 183, chapter 4. Chapter 4, page 183, part 3. Evidence-based application of integrated flexibility training. When discussing flexibility, opinions, theories, and applications vary from one professional to another. However, flexibility is a general term, and one needs to be specific as the type of flexibility being discussed. While there are various forms, the basic types of flexibilities are static stretching, holding a stretch at end range or first resistance barrier for 30 seconds. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, partner-assisted stretching, uses a form of contraction and relaxation of agonist muscle. Active isolated stretching, moving into and out of a range of motion and holding the end range no longer than 1 or 2 seconds. Dynamic stretching, using the strength of a muscle to move a joint through a full range of motion without compensation. Flexibility training and increasing joint range of motion, healthy joints. Flexibility has been the subject of debate for several decades, and a lack of consensus encourages researchers to continue to study the methodologies behind stretching, while practitioners struggling to recommend the ideal static flexibility program. Many believe static stretching to provide the benefit of increased range of motion and decreased muscle stiffness. The debate seems to be centered on the basic perceptions such as the type of stretch, static stretching or PNF, the duration of the stretch required to increase range of motion, and mechanism of the adaptation to stretching. How does stretching increase range of motion? Researchers continue to attempt to determine what form of stretching creates the greatest increase in range of motion around a joint. In understanding to the mechanics of the stretching, along with an understanding of the duration of a stretch required to see a significant change in range of motion. Evidence-based research on effects of flexibility training on a range of motion. According to several studies, PNF neuromuscular stretching created the largest gains in range of motion. Sadley et al. Citation found PNF NMS neuromuscular stretching superior to all types of flexibility when used to increase range of motion of the trunk, shoulder, and hamstrings. Whether PNF NMS was performed as either contract, relax, contract technique or the hold, relax, contract technique, significant improvements in range of motion were seen over a 6-week span when compared to traditional static stretching. In fact, when tested head-to-head against a home program of static stretching, PNF stretching reigned supreme. A self-applied PNF stretching program using contract-relax method increased range of motion more than self-applied static stretching. Page 184. Current theories equate increased range of motion to structural changes in stretch sensation, or both. Some theorize that structural changes such as decreased stiffness of the muscle tendon unit and passive resistive force take place when performing static stretching, while others hypothesize that the muscle structure does not actually change, but a change in the stretch sensation leads to increased range of motion. But a change in stretch sensation, so you get used to the stretch sensation, you probably relax more, and you open up. The greater stretch tolerance might lead to increased range of motion around the joint. The greater stretch tolerance might lead to an increased range of motion. While various stretching protocols exist, researchers have begun to understand how the effect of stretching duration on increasing range of motion. In an important study by Bandy and co-workers, the duration of holding a stretch was measured against shorter or longer static stretching protocols for the hamstrings. 30 seconds of holding a single stretch once daily, 5 days per week, for 6 weeks resulted in an increased range of motion at a joint. However, in contrast, Bandy's findings, Bizet, Jones, more citation, investigated a static stretching protocol using 3 sets of 30-second holds and showed no effects on increasing range of motion of the hamstrings and quadriceps. Likewise, the research of Yotis and colleagues showed no significant change in range of motion in the gastrocnemius after implementing a 6-week stretching regimen, 30-second duration, performed once daily, 5 days. Performed once daily. Given the differences in research results, it is important to analyze a few different factors that may affect the relationship between static stretching and range of motion. NASM position on use of static stretching to enhance range of motion. While NASM position on the use of static stretching to enhance range of motion. While much more research must be done to understand some of the underlying factors on how stretching increases range of motion, there are a few determinants that NASM uses to understand the role of static stretching on increasing range of motion. First is the determination of muscle imbalances. Determination of muscle imbalance that may affect range of motion. When testing the range of motion of the hamstring, stretching the opposite muscles, the quadriceps, increases range of motion of the hips. When the quadricep is tight, an anterior pelvic tilt of the hips is created, the anterior and the front, effectively increasing the length of the hamstrings. So it's pulling on the hamstrings. That decreases range of motion of the hip flexor. Flexibility and range of motion requires a thorough and integrated assessment process to evaluate all aspects or barriers to range of motion and not an isolated look at singular muscle. A limited range of motion could be secondary to an issue at a neighboring joint. Second, the implementation of the method may be specific to certain muscles. Second, the implementation of the method may be specific to certain muscles. So certain muscles respond a certain way to the method. When looking at the contrasting studies of Bandy versus Yotis, notice that Yotis implemented an exact replica of the methodology of Bandy, but performed the stretches on the gastrocnemius muscle, focusing on range of dorsiflexion. While Yotis found that stretching regimen did not produce the same results as Bandy, no significant increase in ankle range of motion. There is a significant point to consider. The calves are chronically tight muscle due to the daily positioning. The ankle is usually in a plantar flex position due to the type of footwear people wear. Given constant strain on the calf muscles, a stretching intervention program for increasing dorsiflexion might require a greater amount of stretching each day than the hamstring protocols used by Bandy. Lastly, research still has to consider integrated effects of flexibility. An isolated stretching regimen may not create the required effects on increasing and sustaining the range of motion. In fact, it is NASM's position that proper flexibility program would require the incorporation of the strengthening program as well. Each joint moves as a result of length tension and force couple relationships surrounding a joint. If one muscle is short or overactive, its functional antagonist must be long and underactive. Given this relationship, a proper flexibility program will require implementing a corrective strengthening program to help a joint increase range of motion and return to normal arthrokinematics. Overall, the NASM concurs with current research that has found static stretching to increase range of motion. Overall, NASM concurs with current research that has found that static stretching to increase range of motion. However, using clinical evidence to support their stance, NASM believes that a proper flexibility program would also require implementation of corrective strengthening program to enhance range of motion. Flexibility and strength enhancement. Static stretching has become commonplace in most exercise and performance activities, usually performed prior to and after the exercise or sporting activity. Historically, clinicians have used static stretching to increase range of motion and decrease muscle stiffness, which theoretically will prevent injury and enhance performance through optimal neuromuscular efficiency. If proper length-tension relationships exist around the joint, However, given the changes that static stretching may create in muscle, researchers have questioned the practice of static stretching prior to strength activity, hypothesizing that static stretching may negatively influence strength because static stretching affects muscles by affecting the mechanical properties to include decreasing stiffness and increasing muscle compliance. And 2, affecting the neuromuscular control of the muscle, decreasing activation as shown by autogenic inhibition. Flexibility has numerous potential benefits when properly integrated into a training program. Whether it's beneficial as a warm-up is still the subject of vigorous debate among clinicians and researchers alike. One facet of flexibility researchers have yet to determine is whether static stretching influences strength and when static stretching should be integrated into a training protocol, I say after. Evidence-based research on flexibility's training effects on strength. Research continues to amass demonstrating a possible negative effect on strength from static stretching. However, research has also been published showing no negative influence of acute static stretching on strength. A review of this body of research has suggested the differential effects may relate to the length of time the static stretch is performed. Stretches lasting longer than 60 seconds appear to consistently impair strength and power performance, while stretches of shorter durations may not. Researchers point to decrease in motor unit activation post-stretch. Researchers point to decrease in motor unit activation post-stretch, decreasing maximal voluntary contractions. Using electro and mechanomyographic data, determined that static stretching reduced both muscle strength and power. In fact, altered the mechanical properties of the muscle. The decreased electromyographic activity and increased mechanomyographic activity lead researchers to believe static stretching may reduce activation of a muscle and decrease muscle stiffness. The decreased electromyographic activity and increased mechanomyographic activity led researchers to believe static stretching may reduce activation of a muscle and decrease muscle stiffness. In fact, whether assisted or self-applied, even short bouts of static stretching, 15-second holds, relaxation, reduce strength approximately 78% in the muscles tested, hip, thigh, calf. Knudsen and Knofel concurred with these results, showing even 40 seconds of static stretching done in bouts of 10 seconds for 4 repetitions decreased the wrist flexor strength. Of great interest were the 2 studies performed by Fowles and a power and cohort that demonstrated the effects of static stretching lasted for up to 2 hours. Collectively, these studies found that static stretching not only affected strength immediately afterwards, but the effects continue for 60 to 120 minutes post-stretch. These strength deficits post-static stretch are significant in determining the viability of including static stretching into a warm-up. Sports performance professionals may consider using static stretching protocols during strength and power levels of the OPT model only for those muscles that have been identified as potential overactive and are not being stressed during the following workout. SMR has been shown to increase range of motion without having a negative effect on force potential. This showed that SMR results in acute improvements in range of motion. This found that SMR did not result in any decrease in physical performance after acute exposure and even improved some power, agility, and strength measures. Therefore, SMR is a valuable flexibility protocol during all phases. Chronic stretching programs do not appear to have any negative effect on strength or power. Therefore, the primary concern surrounding stretching is the potential negative effect on acute muscular performance during speed, power, or strength actions following static stretching. But improvements in range of motion over time are desirable, and stretching should not be avoided due to fear of negative effect on muscular performance. Page 187. The NASM position of youth flexibility training and strength enhancement. Overall research shows that static stretching done prior to strength activity decreases strength and may affect strength up to 2 hours post-stretch. Thus, static stretching should not be performed in a warm-up. If an individual is going to participate in high-level strength activities, NASM concurs with the research, but limits its agreement in reference to a few factors. First, if a muscle imbalance exists, strength might also be limited because of decreased range of motion and neuromuscular efficiency resulting from improper length-tension relationships altering the force-couple relationships that lead to altered reciprocal inhibition. Static stretching should be incorporated to address areas where tight overactive muscles are identified using a movement assessment. Second, improper firing of synergists during an exercise, synergistic dominance, can lead to faulty movement patterns and, in effect, limit strength. Incorporating static stretching to address areas that show altered reciprocal inhibition, which in turn addresses synergistic dominance, may enhance strength by increasing neuromuscular efficiency by allowing for greater recruitment of motor units. The acute effects of static stretching have led NASM to conclude that flexibility training in advance of strength training should be limited to active, isolated, and dynamic stretches unless in muscle imbalances that may impede proper movement and limit range of motion after present, in which case static stretch would be appropriately for the muscles identified as tight overactive. If static stretching is used to address these imbalances, it must follow with active isolated stretching, dynamic stretching, or both to increase proper reciprocal inhibition, neuromuscular. If static stretching is used to address these imbalances, it must be followed with active isolated stretching, dynamic stretching, or both to increase proper reciprocal inhibition, neuromuscular efficiency, and motor neuron excitability before engaging in strength training activity. Furthermore, while some evidence suggests that an acute bout of static stretching may inhibit muscular strength when performed in isolation, we are not ready to infer that specific static stretching performed to correct muscle imbalances and used in conjunction with active and dynamic stretching will equate to decreased overall strength. Run-on sentence. Flexibility and performance enhancement. Flexibility and performance enhancement. The debate among many professionals centers on the use of static stretching, one form of flexibility prior to performance. There are some who have determined that static stretching negatively influences performance based on reports of impaired balance, reaction time, movement time, and jump height. There exist, however, some contradictory studies that level static stretching may increase lower limb stiffness, resulting in higher counter movement jumps, and potentially have no effect on vertical jump heights. This studied a group of young soccer players and found that static stretching as a supplementary training method improved flexibility, speed, and agility. Of potential importance is varied. Approach to the subject of pre-activity static stretching. Oh my God. Last page. The NASM position on the use of flexibility training and performance enhancement. The NASM position on the use of flexibility training and performance. Overall, research shows performance is influenced by static stretching. This may decrease jump height, balance, reaction times, and movement times. The acute effects of static stretching have led NASM to determine pre-activity flexibility should be limited to active, isolated, and dynamic stretches, unless muscle imbalances are present that may impede proper movement and limit performance. If static stretching is used to address these imbalances, it must be followed with active, isolated, and or dynamic stretching to increase proper reciprocal inhibition, neuromuscular efficiency, and motor neuron excitability pre-activity. While some evidence suggests that an acute bout of static stretching may inhibit muscular strength when performed in isolation, NASM does not infer the specific static stretching performed to correct muscle imbalances and used in conjunction with active, isolated, and dynamic stretching will equate to decreased performance. NASM does not infer that specific static stretching performed to correct muscle imbalances and used in conjunction with active, isolated, dynamic stretching will equate to decreased performance. Why would they have to write all that? Summary. There are many stretching exercises designed to improve flexibility. Regardless of the method chosen, individuals can achieve flexibility by manipulating the duration of the stretch, intensity of the stretch, velocity of the movement, and frequency of movement performed. To achieve optimal soft tissue extensibility with neuromuscular control, the individual should follow the integrated flexibility continuum, corrective, active, functional. The risk of injury is reduced when these stretching techniques are combined with integrated training programs that focuses on neuromuscular efficiency at all levels. Further, research is needed to determine flexibility techniques optimal for any given person. And chapter 4, flexibility, part 4.